All right, at this time, we return to the open meeting. Any public comments for tonight?
No, sir.
All right, no public comments for February 13th agenda items. All right, next up is consideration and possible action on calling a bond election to be held by the Lovejoy Independent School District on May 3rd, 2025. Mr. Wellman.
Turn that on. Okay, good evening, Board of Trustees. So tonight, we're going to be presenting the Bond Planning Committee's recommendations. As you may recall, last week on Thursday, February 6th, the Bond Planning Committee, a few of the members of the Bond Planning Committee presented their recommendation and their recommended bond package. So tonight, we're going to present the order and then also present you with kind of the Bond Planning Committee's recommendation organized into a proposition. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Based on some of the legal requirements that were established by the Education Code. So what we have here is kind of the draft ballot language that is broken into the 5 different propositions. So Proposition A is just going to be our general proposition. So when we're looking at Proposition A, this is going to include all of our existing facilities and the construction, the upgrades, the and equipping, renovating of all of our facilities, which includes safety and security, a new transportation and maintenance facility, and so forth. And within this proposition, the amount for this proposition is $265,510,000. And then with Proposition B, so part of the requirement that was passed in 2019 is that there's certain items that we need to split out of the general prop. And one of those items is technology, which is movable technology. And in this Proposition B, the recommendation and the amount is $3,930,000. Another item that is required to be split out is stadiums. So these are stadiums that seat more than 1,000 people, and anything that is within the stadium. So if you have a track that is within the athletic stadium, that would have to be included in the proposition. So Proposition C, the recommendation for improvements to the existing stadium is $4,525,000. And then the next item is our other recreational athletic facilities. So these are going to be the different facilities that don't necessarily meet that threshold of seating over 1,000. So these would be such facilities as our tennis courts, baseball and softball fields. So within this proposition, we're looking at $1,505,000 as a recommendation for Proposition D. And then Proposition E is linked to the natatorium. So natatorium is defined anything that has a swimming pool that is covered. So with our swimming pool over there at Sloan needs improvements and upgrades. So the amount for this proposition is for $700,000. So the recommended bond package presented here on this slide can be funded under the existing tax rate of 50 cents per $100 worth of taxable value, and it will not require a tax rate increase. So at this time, based on the Bond Planning Committee's recommendation, the administration recommends that a May 3rd, 2025 bond election be authorized according to the order of bond election with Proposition A in the amount of $265,510,000. Proposition B in the amount of $3,930,000. Proposition C in the amount of $4,525,000. And then Proposition D in the amount of $1,505,000. And Proposition E in the amount of $700,000. So I'm happy at this time to answer any questions that you may have.
I got a few questions, Thomas. On Proposition C, that's not for building a new stadium though, but it's mainly for track and concession stands, is that correct?
That's correct. So it's to make improvements and upgrades to our existing stadium and not to build a new stadium. So it would be addressing items such as the track resurfacing and the concession stands.
Okay, and then the tax rate unchanged. So if we didn't do an election, the tax rate would be 50 cents?
That is correct, yes.
If we did an election for 100 million, what would the tax rate be?
It would be 50 cents.
And then if all of these were passed, all the props, it would be 50 cents.
That is correct, yes, sir.
But if this is called and people go to the ballot, it's going to say, this is a tax increase, even though our rate's not changing. So what does that mean when people go to the ballot if it's called and it says it's a tax increase?
Yes, sir. So you're correct. The tax rate will not increase, and the only way for your annual tax bill to increase would be the increase in the property value. But according to the language, it's a legal requirement for it to state that it'll be a tax increase. And what that's alluding to is essentially that it's extending your what we would say amortization schedule. So your payments a little bit further. Instead of being paid off in, let's say, 15, 20 years, we're extending it to, from 20 to 30 years.
Your tax payment will be the same until the current amortization schedule basically expires and all the debt's extinguished, which should be 15 or 20 years.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Can you speak a little bit more about the legal or the law that changed in 2019? Because I know the last time, it's been a long time since we had a bond like this, over 10 years, I think. And the last time we did this, initially we had just one proposition, and then we had another election where we had two propositions, but now we've got 5, and I think that's a lot different than what people are used to. So maybe talk a little bit more to that.
Right. No, absolutely. So pre-2019, it was just one general proposition where everything could be included into one proposition. In 2019, there was a focus mainly to address, the large athletic stadiums that seat over 1,000. So wanting to get to provide a little bit more visibility and breaking those different items out to allow the voters to vote directly on those individual items. So when we think about also just recreational and extracurricular, they wanted that kind of broken out as well. And then, as we mentioned here, with also like the natatorium. So it's mainly to address extracurricular recreational centers separated out from the general.
So the itemization, to Jason's point, this is a result of legislative changes that require it to be disclosed this way on the ballot? Is that what you're telling us?
That's correct, yes.
So is there should voters or the community read into anything in Proposition B or E being a higher or lower priority versus Proposition A? Is there anything to do with where things fall on the ballot as far as priority ranking?
No, this is not a priority listing. It's just listing out I believe there's 2 other items that are not applicable to us in this. So it's just listing out the items. There's no set priority. We have the discretion as a district to list them. A is always going to be the general, but then from B on, it's to the discretion of the district.
So I know we had a process with the bond planning committee that made the recommendation to us last week that was very detailed about all the different meetings they went through and the way they prioritized different projects and what ultimately came through to the recommendation to us. Were they involved in breaking out this A, B, C, D, E process?
No, they were not involved. They were made aware, and we shared that we did have to break them out into the different propositions. That would have been probably in the first or second meeting. So they were aware of the process, that we took their numbers and then worked with our bond attorney in order to break them out to ensure that they're in the right propositions.
So the bond committee's recommendation was given to the attorneys that then used what was required by law to break it out into these A, B, C, D, E categories.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thomas, how long ago, this capital committee didn't just happen overnight? When was the start of the committee? And before the capital committee, were you also looking at facilities before that?
Yes, that is correct. I want to say it's been a 2-year work that was put into this. So it started with kind of looking at our long-range facility plan and looking at and kind of addressing and assessing the needs of all of our facilities. That then led into this process to where we went into a request for qualifications and brought on VLK to establish our long-range facility plan, and then that then led into the bond planning committee that made the recommendation here last Thursday.
And part of that related to, we hadn't had a bond for over 10 years, 11 years ago, and then the way students learn has changed over that time and evolved. And we've seen other districts near us doing bonds quite a bit lately to transition like we're trying to transition. Is that kind of how the committee came about, the recommendations of the renovations and stuff in the bond?
Yes, I believe that was an influencing factor in their determination. So looking at our facilities and knowing that it's been 10 years and that we have aging facilities and items that are, close to the end of their life cycle.
You mentioned that the last time we had done a bond was 10 years ago. So, and of course, when you look at those numbers versus what we have here, it's kind of a big shift. So could you talk a little bit about how that inflationary component impacted those recommendations? And then also, how long do we project that this money would then help us with our facilities going forward?
Yep, I want to say that we used in our inflationary numbers come up with this roughly a little over 7.5% annually in developing the cost. But then you're thinking about that's just from today's dollars. So the inflationary increase from 11 years ago, or even going back to 2003, 2007, having to factor the construction inflation involved there. So we did factor in all of that when coming up with these numbers. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part of that question?
Yeah, I can answer the part of that question. Just in the construction industry, back 15 years ago, you could build an elementary school for 15, 16 million, and now they're over 40 million. So the inflation has been significant, but in construction side, it's a lot more than the other inflation on the CPI.
And the second part was, if assuming this bond election is called and that the voters, choose this type of investment, how long will these investment dollars help support our current facilities?
Yep, absolutely. I think as part of the process, we are looking at a 5-year window to address the needs of the district. But again, that it's all, there's going to be influencing factors as we look at kind of the timeline from there. So it could be 5 years, it could be a little bit longer, depending on kind of the looking at when we're going to issue the debt and our capacity planning and things like that. That could extend it a little bit, but for the most part, it should cover within the 5 years.
But 5 years is construction, but the building after you construct it should last another 20 years.
That's correct. Yes.
Kyle, did you want?
Yeah, sorry. What you just said is spot on. There are components of the proposal from the committee that will have a shorter lifespan. So, for instance, technology. Technology doesn't have quite the lifespan that maybe an HVAC system would. There are components that are in there in the committee's recommendation that would have a 15-year lifespan. There are components that will have a 20-year lifespan. And so in total, when you look at this, you typically do in 5-year increments, but the impact of what the proposal that's been brought forth last week will be out past, to 20 years or potentially beyond.
So as we look at each component, and if we were to move forward and issue bonds to support these components, I wouldn't want a 5-year asset amortized over 15. Talk to the community and to us about how that's paired to ensure that we don't have assets that are depleted that we're still paying for.
So that's a really great point. And so what we would do, if the bond is called for and is successful, then we work very closely with both finance, the bond attorney, and construction management to make sure that every phase of each project is going to be amortized and annualized according to the lifespan of the items that are going to be included in that project.
You may recall that in our updated bonding capacity last Thursday, we worked with Doug and we identified the life expectancy of the different projects, and we broke it down into 3 separate types of issuance. So we had the technology, the movable devices that are roughly about a 3-year, and then we had about a 10-year for the assets, and then a 20-year, 20-plus years. So we'll work with our FA and work with Mr. Witt to ensure that we're not paying 15 years on a 3-year life asset.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back and talk a little bit about the committee's process. Did they get all their questions answered? Did you feel it was representative across the community of different constituencies that would be interested in this kind of activity?
So we had a 49-person committee, that many were here last week and presented, and we do have some committee members here tonight. But I think through the process and through the meetings and through the tours and through the collective conversations that happen in each of the table groups, I feel like each committee member left the end of meeting 6 with no questions that were still hanging out there, or information that they had requested or that come about throughout those conversations that wasn't presented and made available. I feel like it was a very thorough process and very productive. And like I mentioned last week, they really leaned into the conversations and had some good debate along the way. And there were items that didn't make the list that you see in front of you per their recommendation.
Other questions for Thomas or Kyle or?
Can you help us understand, if this bond election were to be called but be unsuccessful, what would be the impacts that we might face as a district with our current facilities?
I can speak. Was that due to the question?
Really good question, clearly.
So that's a really great question and one that deserves consideration. And I think that was actually a question that happened at all the tables probably every night that we met. But in looking at our facilities and looking at just if we kind of compartmentalize and we look at just facilities alone, we have aging facilities, we have systems that are end of life, right? And that's one component. But we also have teaching and learning materials and tools that are end of life. We also have teaching and learning environments that are no longer, that were designed over 20 years ago that need some consideration. And so, if the decision is not to move forward, there are serious implications financially when you just look at heating and cooling and providing the resources that our teachers and students need that will be directly impacted.
How much square feet do we manage as a district?
We have roughly 925,000 square feet here within the district.
And if I remember right, all the proposals, they will affect every campus in
Ye-
some way.
Yes, sir. Every facility that we have here in the district would be impacted by the committee's proposal. which means every student would also be impacted by the committee's proposal.
Could you tell us a little bit more about, I know you've covered this in prior presentations, but just for recap, could you tell us more about how you did the original assessment on the facility to determine which items, what is our inventory of items, where are they at their stage of life, and how that was rolled into the recommendation?
Sure. So if you go all the way back to 2022, which November of 2022 is when the Capital Planning Committee was first designed and implemented. And so the spring of 2023, PBK architects came into the district and did a thorough assessment of each campus, each facility, and baseline that with industry standard on lifespan, life cycle. That information, along with facility tours, happened along the way with that Capital Planning Committee. The Capital Planning Committee did their tours. They did a SWOT analysis throughout each one of those site visits. We compiled that at the conclusion of each meeting, and then at the very end of the semester, that sixth and final meeting, they got to see all of the data kind of put in front of them. In June of 24, whenever we did request for qualification to work with an additional architect, that's when PBK came in to the district. PBK took all of the assessment data that had been done for that year and a half prior, or almost 2 years prior, along with the SWOT feedback that the committee provided during all the tours. Then they went out and did additional assessments because there had been a lapse in time. They did their assessments. They actually hired and brought in a third party to look at all of our mechanical systems, again, benchmarking that against industry standard, but also seeing what the current state was. And so all of that information was utilized and presented in chunks by campus and by priority to the Long-Range Facility Planning Committee, and then that rolled into our Bond Planning Committee work. And so there's a lot of information that they were presented with and had to go through and consider, and that's part of what made it really difficult to go through. I think a lot of the tables wanted to put priority one on everything, but knowing that the budget doesn't allow for that, they really had to dig in and decide what they wanted to make as a recommendation.
I think one of the charges that the Board of Trustees has, and one of our goals, is to support teachers and staff as one of our most important assets towards serving children. So could you talk about how the relationship between this proposal and how that may benefit the teachers in their classrooms?
Sure. So there are simple things that at first glance may not seem like it would have an impact. For instance, all lighting district-wide currently, this proposal would include complete replacement to LED. And so there's a huge cost savings there on the M&O side, but what there also is that the illumination given off by the LED lighting in a classroom or a learning environment has impact on the students' ability to be able to see what's going on, whether it be reading text off of out of a book or the displays that are hanging on the wall in the classroom where the instruction's taking place. The technology that Mr. Willman talked about is a vital part of our teaching and learning. And so there are many aspects of what the committee proposed. Another one that we sometimes forget about, and we hear about HVAC a lot, but making sure that we're doing what we can to keep our teachers and learners comfortable. And then there's the safety aspect of it, which obviously is paramount. And so every facility across the district in the proposal that was brought forward by the committee will receive upgrades in relation to safety and security, which again has a direct impact on teaching and learning.
Kyle, whenever we got the feedback of the employee survey, were you shocked with some of the comments related to our facilities from the teachers?
I wouldn't say that I was shocked. A lot of the feedback is in direct alignment with what we've seen throughout our 2-year process of going through and looking at our buildings and You know, we have a lot of staff, honestly, that are really have adapted and are making do the best they can with what they're supplied and given to teach with. And I think that was a constant theme that we saw when we did our tours. We have many staff in our district that make do. It's not ideal, and they realize it's not ideal, but they do their very best to make sure they're doing all they can to meet the needs of the kiddos that they're charged to serve and teach every day. So I wouldn't say that I was shocked. There were some items in there maybe that I made me scratch my head a little bit, but I would say overall it was in alignment with what we had seen.
Similar to what you just said, Julie, the term that came to mind when you're describing some of these things is our teachers doing a really good job of surviving in the context of some things that are not great. I think as a board member, I'd like to see that a little bit more on the thriving side, not the surviving side. Do you feel that these changes will move it from surviving to thriving?
I think these changes do a couple things. I think it helps, you know, we've got some ground to make up. It has been over 10 years now. And I think not only is it going to help get us to current, but I think it helps really put us on a good pathway and a good cycle looking forward, moving down the road that will help us maintain in smaller chunks more efficiently than playing catch up and having the big gaps that we currently have.
Again, it's kind of related to the construction costs, just kind of going back to that inflation is if we don't call this today, we still have those needs. The needs don't go away, correct?
Yeah, that's a great point. They'll still be there. This is just an opportunity for us to have a mechanism to fund addressing some needs, some of which have been ongoing for a little bit. And but absolutely, if you guys decide as a board not to move forward tonight, the needs are still there tomorrow.
Would you prefer to address these needs during the summertime, or would you prefer to address them when the kids are in school?
So the preference is going to be whatever's least disruptive, knowing that the scope of the work that's in this recommendation, some will have to happen during the school year in order for us to not have ongoing work.
I was meaning would you rather do it as an emergency, or would you rather plan for the?
Oh, I got you. Absolutely. It's much better when you can be proactive and you can put together a schedule where you're working ahead of a situation as opposed to playing catch up and working behind it.
I also wanted to echo what Julie was asking as far as student impact and staff impact. So we had students on the bond planning committee, correct? Who had a voice to share their proposal as well and be a part of that process.
Yes, ma'am. We did have student representation. This won't be a surprise, but you know, the students look at things through a completely different lens, which is why they were an asset to the committee's work and those conversations at the table groups. But they had voice. They had brought a completely different perspective. But they were, like I said, they were a vital part of that process.
All right, if there are no other questions, I'd consider a motion.
I move we take the recommendation from the administration to call a May 3rd election for a bond.
So moved, Amy Smith. Second. Second, Jeff Wood. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you very much. Item 7 is announcements. Ms. Cordell, do you have any announcements tonight? All right, with no other business tonight, we will adjourn the meeting.